The midday heat in Medan always seemed to cling to everything, thick and heavy like a damp cloth. But even the oppressive humidity couldn't wilt the vibrant colors exploding from my small front garden. Bougainvillea in fiery hues of magenta and crimson tumbled over the low fence, interspersed with the cheerful yellows of hibiscus and the delicate whites of fragrant jasmine. It was my little oasis, a riot of tropical beauty that brought me immense joy and, apparently, considerable displeasure to Mrs. Lim, our ever-vigilant guardian of neighborhood uniformity. Mrs. Lim, whose villa across the street stood as a monument to beige conformity amidst our more colorful dwellings, had taken it upon herself to be the arbiter of all things aesthetically acceptable in our housing complex. Her pronouncements on matters ranging from the acceptable shade of outdoor paint to the precise height of hedges were legendary, often delivered with the unwavering conviction of a seasoned dictator. My garden, a deliberate explosion of color and life, had been a point of contention from the moment the first seedling broke ground. Mrs. Lim's initial complaints were subtle, veiled comments about maintaining a consistent neighborhood aesthetic and avoiding excessive visual clutter. I had politely nodded, secretly relishing the contrast my vibrant patch created against her sterile landscape. But her passive aggression had escalated. First, there were the anonymous notes left tucked under my gate, typed in a formal, accusatory font, suggesting that my unconventional planting choices might be in violation of the complex's aesthetic guidelines. I had ignored them, figuring they lacked any official standing. Then came the official notice from the HOA, a sternly worded letter citing Clause 3, subsection B of the complex's aesthetic regulations, which vaguely mandated harmonious and visually appealing landscaping. The letter stated that my garden was deemed excessively colorful and lacking in thematic coherence, and threatened a hefty fine if I didn't bring it into compliance within 30 days. My blood had boiled. Thematic coherence? What theme was Mrs. Lim's beige on beige landscape adhering to? The theme of utter blandness? I reread the HOA regulations, searching for any specific rules about flower colors or plant varieties. There were none. The clause was deliberately vague, leaving it open to subjective interpretation, an interpretation, it seemed, solely dictated by Mrs. Lim's personal taste. I wasn't one to back down from a fight, especially when it came to something I loved. My garden was my sanctuary, a piece of home I had painstakingly cultivated in the sometimes overwhelming bustle of Medan. It attracted butterflies and bees, filled the air with fragrance, and brought smiles to the faces of other residents who often paused to admire the vibrant display. I decided to fight back, armed with the very rulebook Mrs. Lim seemed so eager to wield against me. I reread Clause 3, subsection B multiple times, dissecting its vague wording. Harmonious and visually appealing. Appealing to whom? Harmonious with what? The sea of beige across the street? My first step was to document everything. I took photographs of my garden from every angle, showcasing the variety of healthy, well-maintained plants. I also took photos of Mrs. Lim's garden, or rather, her meticulously manicured expanse of green lawn, punctuated by precisely trimmed, identical shrubs. Next, I decided to canvass my neighbors. I spoke to the families on either side of me, the elderly couple down the street who always complimented my flowers, and the young parents who often walked by with their children, pointing out the different colors. To my relief, every single one of them expressed their appreciation for my garden, many saying it brightened their day and added much-needed character to the complex. Several even admitted to finding Mrs. Lim's garden rather sterile. Armed with photographic evidence and a chorus of supportive neighbors, I drafted a formal response to the HOA. I addressed each point in their notice, arguing that harmonious didn't necessarily mean monochromatic, and that visually appealing was subjective and clearly found appealing by many in the community. I emphasized that my garden was well tended, didn't encroach on any common areas, and posed no threat to the safety or well-being of other residents. I also pointed out the lack of specific regulations regarding plant types or colors in the HOA rulebook, arguing that the vague clause was being unfairly and arbitrarily applied based on one resident's personal preference. I attached the photographs of my garden and a signed petition from my supportive neighbors. I delivered the response to the HOA management office myself, handing it to a rather flustered-looking clerk who seemed unaccustomed to such direct defiance. I made sure to keep a copy for my records. The 30-day deadline loomed, and Mrs. Lim's smug demeanor grew with each passing day. I could see her watching me from her windows, a self-satisfied smirk playing on her lips. She probably imagined I was frantically digging up my beloved plants, replacing them with rows of dull, uniform greenery. But I stood my ground, watering my bougainvillea and deadheading my hibiscus with quiet determination. I knew I was right, and I had done everything I could to prove it. Finally, the day after the deadline, another letter arrived from the HOA. My heart pounded as I tore open the envelope. Inside, the tone was markedly different from the previous stern warning. The letter stated that the HOA had reviewed my response and the accompanying documentation. While acknowledging the concerns raised by a resident regarding the aesthetic consistency of landscaping, they had concluded that my garden, as presented, did not constitute a clear violation of the existing regulations. The letter went on to say that they would be reviewing and updating the landscaping guidelines in the future to provide more specific criteria, but in the meantime, no fines would be levied against my property. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. I had won. I had stood up to the neighborhood Karen and her arbitrary enforcement of vague rules, and I had prevailed. Of course, Mrs. Lim was less than thrilled. I saw her across the street, her face a mask of thunderous disbelief as she retrieved her mail. I almost expected smoke to billow from her ears when she undoubtedly read the letter. For the next few weeks, the atmosphere remained tense. Mrs. Lim avoided eye contact, and her usual rounds of neighborhood scrutiny seemed to intensify, though she pointedly ignored my vibrant garden. Then, something unexpected happened. One sweltering afternoon, I was pruning my bougainvillea when I noticed Mrs. Lim standing hesitantly at the edge of her driveway. She looked uncomfortable, as if she were about to ask for a particularly unpleasant favor. Taking a deep breath, she finally called out, her voice surprisingly subdued, "Ensik? Adi?" "Yes, Auntie Lim," I replied, putting down my shears. She shuffled her feet, her gaze fixed on the ground. My little patch of roses, they aren't doing so well this year. You seem to have a knack for gardening." I blinked, genuinely surprised. This was a monumental shift from the woman who had tried to bully me into horticultural conformity. A small smile tugged at the corner of my lips. "Well, Auntie Lim, different plants have different needs. Perhaps the soil isn't right, or maybe they need more sun?" To my further astonishment, she actually walked across the street and stood at the edge of my garden, her eyes, for the first time, showing a hint of genuine curiosity as she took in the riot of colors. "What is this one?" she asked, pointing to a particularly vibrant cluster of orange and yellow lantana. I spent the next half hour talking to Mrs. Lim about my gardening methods, sharing tips about soil preparation, watering, and dealing with pests. She listened intently, occasionally asking questions, her usual air of superiority completely absent. She didn't suddenly transform into a gardening enthusiast, and her own landscape remained resolutely beige. But a small crack had appeared in her armor of conformity. She had, however grudgingly, acknowledged my expertise in something she had tried to condemn. The HOA did eventually update their landscaping guidelines, and while they still emphasized harmony, they also included a clause recognizing the diversity of personal taste and encouraging residents to express their individuality through their gardens. As long as they were well maintained and didn't negatively impact neighboring properties, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of victory. Perhaps my little rebellion had played a tiny part in that shift. Mrs. Lim never apologized for trying to find me, but the fact that she came to me for gardening advice spoke volumes. It was a silent truce, a begrudging acknowledgement that sometimes the most vibrant expressions of life are the ones that dare to defy the monochrome. And in my little corner of Medan, my colorful garden continued to bloom, a testament to the fact that sometimes proving you're right is the most beautiful rebellion of all.